I think there's definitely a difference between reading up on it and actually doing the action of flying an airplane.
That's absolutely true. And that's the satisfaction of teaching, is when that light bulb comes on and you say, you get it, you can think and apply what we've talked about.
The following is a Big Sky Economic Development production.
It's Mars B.
And Kavo.
And this is The Vault at 201 North Broadway.
A business podcast.
Where we bring you entrepreneurs, small business owners, and community leaders of Montana.
To share their stories, expertise, industry insights, and strategies.
And we are sharing them all with you every single week.
You don't want to miss this.
Learn how to better start, manage, and grow your business.
And your leadership style.
Tangible takeaways to save you time and improve whatever it is that you're working on.
You're listening to The Vault.
Thank you to the Small Business Development Center for sponsoring The Vault at 201 North Broadway. The Small Business Development Center offers free personalized support from business plans to financial projections and beyond, empowering small businesses to thrive. Reach out to us at bigsky.economicdevelopment.org. Today, joining us on The Vault is Dan Hargrove, Director of Aviation at Rocky Mountain College. But before we kick it off, we want to thank you for your service.
You're very welcome. It's been my pleasure.
We're happy to have you on today and to share your story. You've got a pretty cool one.
Well, I've lived a very interesting life. I love being in Montana, and I'm very thankful, no doubt.
So today, Dan, we really are excited to have you. I think ever since we started the podcast, I've been telling Kayla, I'm like, we have to have Dan on here. I just remember you telling a little bit about your story when we did a tour years ago up at the Rocky Hangar, but we'd love to learn really how you got to where you are today. So let's begin with, where did you grow up and what was growing up like for you?
I am a Montanan, and I'm very proud of that. My family roots go back many generations around the Bozeman area and out in the Madison Valley. However, my father was active duty Air Force, so Montana, Bozeman was always home. That's where grandparents were. That's where we always went for summer vacation. But my dad moved all over the place and when I was a kid. So I lived all over the country, 2 years here, 3 years there. Always felt a Montanan. I went to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs and then spent next 21 years active duty in the Air Force. So I guess I'm kind of bragging about my Montana roots. That's a very big part of who I am.
Yeah.
Though I didn't grow up in Montana. He spent a year in Vietnam when I was a little kid, and we lived in Bozeman because that's where grandparents were.
Wow. So you kind of followed your dad's footsteps a little bit.
I did. And in fact, I followed an older brother as well. So my dad graduated from Montana State University.
Okay.
His dad had been a ranch hand on the Flying D Ranch out in the Madison Valley.
Okay.
My two grandparents had a combined 11 years of school between the two of them.
Wow.
And as long as we're doing details, I'm going to tell my dad's story very quickly. He was an 18-year-old brand new high school graduate bucking hay on the Flying D Ranch, which today is owned by Ted Turner and all of that, but his dad was a ranch hand there. He was bucking hay with no real thoughts about his future. And a 61-year-old ranch hand said to him, "Hey, Hargrove, you're a pretty sharp guy. What are you doing with your life?" And he said, "I don't know. I'm bucking hay." And he said, "You need to go to college, because if you don't, someday you're going to be 61 years old bucking hay." And he said he literally the next day drove into Bozeman and applied at Montana State College back then, joined Air Force ROTC, ended up joining the Air Force, and he spent a 30-year, very successful career living all over the world. And that was very inspiring to me. He was a pilot.
Yeah.
I have an older brother that did the same thing, who ended up working for Boeing for a bunch of years. And anyway, here I am. I did follow in my dad's footstep of being an Air Force pilot.
So what was it like growing up with access or living on the base? Like, did you get to go flying ever with your dad?
No, I just was... Yeah, we did live on base. And so the military was just the way of living. And everybody was it was very normal for all of my friends' families to be in the military. But my direct connection with it was extremely limited. I toured my dad's airplane once every 5 years, and that was about it. But I really respected him. I liked the idea of service. I really did like the adventure, even as a kid. I think an awful lot of kids say, please don't move me. That'll mess me up. I have no roots. And I went to 3 different high schools in California, Pennsylvania, and South Carolina. Changed schools often. But honestly, when I look back on it, the day you left a high school, that was a big fat bummer. But it suited me well. I liked the adventure of it. I liked living different places and
you already knew where your roots were here in Montana.
That's right.
So you didn't have to find it.
So you're like, we got it, but we get to move around, have those experiences. So what were you like as a young kid? Were there things that you like look back on now and you're like, oh yeah, that really helped me with my trajectory within college, air service, all of those things?
I think to start was the Air Force.
Yeah.
And I didn't grow up saying, I'm going to serve in the Air Force and be like my dad.
I was just going to ask that.
I really didn't. I don't want to say I stumbled into it. I was a good student. My dad and my mom as well, they put those little ideas out there. They exposed me to the Air Force Academy, took me on a tour there when I was 12 years old and we were passing through town. But the greater message of service before self, of being part of something bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
The Vietnam, I was a little kid, but the impact of Vietnam, and a lot of which was tough on my dad personally, but still that belief that what you're doing matters, world politics matter. All of that was just as a little kid, just running in the background.
And like normal ingrained in your life.
Yeah, it all felt very normal. And that was not all of my friends. I mean, we lived in civilian communities, and I went to normal high school and played football and all those kind of normal things. But it fit me to go into the military. And then when I got to the Air Force Academy, it was a great experience. It was hard, but I really did like the discipline and the quality of the people I was around and just the adventure of it.
And so you graduated from high school and then you came to Bozeman. Is that where you went?
No, I
initially?
randomly, I graduated from high school in Southern California.
Okay.
Lived 1 year in San Bernardino, California. And then went to the Air Force Academy. So Montana was just always running in the family background.
So what was this is very foreign to Kayla and I, Air Force Academy.
Yes. Tell us about it.
I mean, you're young, you're going to this out of college, like right? Directly out of college?
Right. No, right out of high school.
Or out of high school. Okay.
So the military service academies, the word you may have heard more often just because of movies is West Point, which is the Army's academy. And
the Navy
the
one,
Naval
I've heard
Academy. It's in Annapolis, Maryland.
Yes, I've heard of that one.
And then back in the 1950s, the Air Force had its birth for an academy, and that's built in Colorado Springs. So it's a 4-year, I hate to use the word college, but it is college, a 4-year university, and they play Division I football and have all of those sorts of things. It's a military school. So you're in uniform all the time. Your underwear is folded a certain way in the drawers. Your bed is made perfectly every morning. You have to be out of bed at 6 o'clock. You march to class. It's a military school, but while you're there, you get a 4-year degree. Mine was in physics. The fun parts about it was I had a PE class that was literally jumping out of airplanes.
Wow.
So
I hope you have photos of that.
Yeah, so that kind of thing, and flying gliders.
My PE class was not like that.
No, it was pretty cool.
Wow.
And then summers you only got 3 weeks of vacation to go home and see family, but the rest of it were a lot of travels or survival school or going to visit a base in Europe, whatever. So 4 years of a military education that was an excellent. And it really is something I just love about Rocky Mountain College is the tie to the liberal arts. The Air Force Academy, you might not realize that. I don't know why anybody would. but it's very heavy in the broad-based education. I literally don't think I picked a single class while I was there other than I picked my major. But it was 2 foreign language and 2 economics and 1 philosophy and 4 English and 3 history and on. And that really informed who I am just as a human being. And I always discuss with students, you're going to forget what you learned in school. That is okay. What remains is the education. It's the way to think. It's an understanding of the human element and how disciplines integrate, et cetera.
I got to ask, what was your foreign language?
Boring Spanish.
But useful.
I wouldn't say Spanish is boring.
Well, more common. It's not boring. It's actually very romantic. But they had Chinese and Russian and some very odd ones like that.
So what are some of those like big learning moments that you had while being there? Because that's and it's all you knew coming out of high school, and that's like your college experience. So what are some of those things that really stood out to you, maybe leadership wise, or
halfway through your question, the answer is leadership. It is a leadership laboratory. The purpose of the academy is to create graduates of character that can lead in, let's be honest, lead in stressful, even lead in combat situations. So everything is outside of the classroom. When you're sitting in a physics class or an English class, it's not much different than any other school. But in the class, outside of the classroom, you spend the freshman year as the subordinate, very strict rules about everything, but you're learning to follow. And I really do believe good leaders started as good followers. And the military in general does a very good job of that. They shave your head and they yell at you and make you do push-ups and all those things, but there's a purpose behind it, including bonding with your classmates, that shared suffering, I will say.
Yeah.
And it's one of the great things of being a high-level athlete, a college, even a high school athlete. It's so hard. And that bonding, that discipline makes you into a better leader. So it was 4 years of leadership laboratory and having serious leadership roles, being in charge of other cadets, doing all kinds of different things.
The blood, sweat, and tears, I think, is definite, like from high school sports. That's
Yeah,
my
absolutely.
only connection to that.
Well, I'm old enough now. I've got grandkids, and one of the very short sermons I give my grandkids all the time is the most important thing in life is not that you're comfortable.
Yeah.
Suffering with someone, helping someone who's in need, stepping in to help someone who's got a bad thing going on, even if what's going on is fake. It's fake on an athletic field. It's fake in military training, but it bonds you to that person and it helps you realize I'm not the most important person around here. Somebody else is.
There's other people. So what did you do after you graduated from that?
Went into active duty Air Force. Back in the day, in the 1980s, you pretty much were headed to pilot training. Things have changed since then. There's more options. Not that was a bad one. So anyway, I went to Air Force pilot training. As a cadet, I had flown just a little bit. I had about 20 hours in a Cessna and one summer program in gliders, which was a pretty neat thing to do with the summer when I was 19 years old.
Yeah. Where was that training at? In Colorado Springs too?
No, then I went to it's Mesa Gateway Airport today. It's in Mesa, Arizona.
In Arizona.
There were various Air Force bases across the southern United States. So I spent a year learning to be a military pilot, just being a student pilot. At the end of the year, they ask you, what do you want to go fly? I really liked teaching, and really the airplane was a T-38. It's a high-performance trainer. My brand new bride was an impact on that as well. She was a student at Arizona State University. So I stayed as a flight instructor, just like they do at Rocky Mountain College. Young pilots teach really young pilots to fly. So then I spent 4 years flying this high-performance airplane. So you flew upside down and could go 700 miles an hour and those sorts of things.
Wow.
But it was still just student training.
Just some of those things.
Well, it was, if you saw a picture of it, you go, oh, that's a very sleek airplane. But it's still just basics of flight, helping someone who doesn't understand. They're smart and they study hard, but you don't know it until you succeed at it, and eye-hand coordination, that sort of thing.
I think there's definitely a difference between reading up on it and actually doing the action of flying an airplane, because, I mean, I could probably read the manual, but I think it would be a way different beast actually being behind it.
That's absolutely true. And that's the satisfaction of teaching, is when that light bulb comes on and you say, you get it, you can think and apply what we've talked about.
Absolutely.
And so what experiences, because I'm curious, so you kind of gravitated towards the teaching aspect. Were you able to do that in your undergrad as well? Or were there, I mean, I'm sure there's aspects as you oversee people that you get to kind of help them with those teachable moments.
Yes, there were a million little ones in this military structure at the Air Force Academy where you had subordinates. They were freshmen, but you weren't there to make their lives miserable. They were there to teach them. One other very small example was intramural sports were mandatory, and everybody is a pretty good high school athlete. So juniors were the referees. So I spent one of the funnest things I ever did was playing rugby.
Wow. Oh, it's a crazy one.
It's crazy. It's just crazy. They got rid of it because too many people got hurt.
Yeah, it's so true.
But I spent 2 years as a rugby player, and there's kind of no rules. I mean, there are, but they're kind of weird. But a moment in my life was being a referee in a sport that I didn't know very well, refereeing people that didn't know the sport very well, and I was alone. So I would be the only referee on the field, and it taught me a lot about leadership and decision-making and confidence. And yes, trying to learn, but even if you don't know everything, act like you do, and that really helps. So there's just one example, but that, again, back to that
example.
Leadership and teaching is a big part of who I am.
Remind me to tell you my rugby story later on.
Okay, are your knees still okay?
It wasn't me, but yeah, the first time I ever went to a rugby game, and it was a high school rugby team, the first couple of minutes, somebody's knee got blown out and another person's ear almost got ripped off. It was partially ripped off.
I had quite a concussion playing rugby and lost my pilot qualification for a few weeks because of it. So then I was fine, but anyway.
Yeah, it's a crazy sport.
But you said you played football too, right?
In high school.
Yeah.
And I played intramurals at the Air Force Academy. It was tackle with pads, but anyway.
Wow.
I was not college quality, but I had
I mean, if you play in
it's
high
important.
school.
It's important.
I love high school sports.
So you really just loved and thrived on your Air Force Academy.
Let's not overstate that. You don't love it when you do it.
Yeah,
it's just,
you appreciate it.
You're too young, but you'll know that as life goes by, you forget the bad and you remember the good.
Yeah.
So when I get together with my old buddies today, which I still do, we only tell the funny stories. No, I didn't love every minute of it. There was a lot about it that was unlovable. But it was a good experience, and I look back as a grown-up, and I'm very thankful for the experiences I had and seeing, well, why was that miserable, suffering event in my life? Well, it taught me something.
And here's how you take it and run with it. So you were in Arizona for a few years teaching, and then did you get transferred?
Yes, then after almost 4 years of that, it's just time, the Air Force just moves you along. You never do anything for too long. Then I got my first choice. I really had... Most people assume that you want to be a fighter pilot, fly upside down and be Tom Cruise. And I get it. And I have a lot of good friends doing that. I had done the high performance flying, and I really, and my dad's influence was part of this.
And was he still active?
He was.
While you were,
and he had been a cargo pilot, and that's what I wanted to go do. A couple of things I liked about flying cargo airplanes. One is that every day you were doing an actual mission. You were really moving something somewhere that mattered. Of course, people that train for combat, that's important, but by definition, the great majority of it is training, and then hopefully you never even practice those skills in actual combat. Plus, I did like working on a crew, and I did like travel. And yes, I missed Christmas Day, and I missed a kid's soccer game and those sorts of things, but I was just hauling military stuff around the world. But if today, if the president says, oh, there's been a terrible earthquake someplace in the world, the United States is going to help. Well, how does the United States physically help? Well, they call up cargo airplanes in the Air Force and send materials, whatever it is they're going to send. So I had an awful lot of flying that when you got done, you went, this was real. What I accomplished today was very important. And I did like the travel. It was really interesting to literally fly around the world, and that was fun.
And when you were going to those locations, what's it like to fly a cargo airplane compared to the other one you were, the high performance? I'll start with that one. Normally I have a slew of questions.
It's about the people.
A little
in the
slower,
crew.
I think.
Well, they are slower, and you don't go upside down.
Yeah.
But it's about a crew. You went from being either alone in an airplane, or most of the time I had me and one student, and the only goal was to learn to fly. Where in the cargo world, you've got a crew of 5 or 6 people. I'm in command, and I have to worry about them, their welfare, their ability to do their job well. Obviously, teamwork makes a big difference. And that part of it, the leading a crew in flight, not any different than an airline pilot today. Some differences because it was military cargo. we could do airdrop and push people or equipment out the back end. And then we flew all over the place. There was nothing routine. We went everywhere in the world.
And would you get to, like, with that travel, is it like you're one and done, or do you get a little time in those locations?
There is kind of the joke that I've been everywhere in the world, but I've only been there for a few hours.
Okay.
I didn't see anything. At times, but honestly, it was usually when your airplane broke or something like that. I've been to Iceland 3 times. Wow. But I've never been there for longer than 2 hours. So it is
at least you've been there.
Right. It's a pin in the map. It does count on my list.
There
but I've
get to see the Northern Lights there?
I did fly to Greenland one time, far northern Greenland, and flew over the magnetic North Pole, where the Northern Lights were actually in all directions. It was at night. It was very cool.
Oh, that is really cool.
So in your time flying with the students and then up to the cargo, were there any situations that happened as you were flying that were maybe a little dicey due to weather or?
Oh, I've had a couple of engine failures where you just deal with it. Something went wrong mechanically.
What does that mean, deal with it?
Well, you just curious.
See, when I think of engine failure, I think, well, say your prayers. This is the end.
Every pilot on a multi-engine airplane is prepared for that bad thing to happen. So if you're in a 2-engine airplane and you lose one engine, obviously it's not good, but there is an out. There is a way to plan. You have enough fuel, you know where you're going to go, you figure out the weather, all that stuff. So I don't want to say it's no big deal, but if an airliner today over Billings lost an engine, the crew would totally handle it.
Yeah.
It would be very unusual, but I don't want to say it's not a big deal.
It's not as scary as everybody thinks it is.
That is what the training is for.
Yeah.
You're ready for that.
It's intense training.
It is.
I had to learn how stewardesses, I guess,
flight attendants.
Correct term. Flight attendants, how they get training, and it is intense.
It's a big deal. And every day you look at a flight attendant and go, all you do is walk the aisle and pour drinks. Of course that's not true.
Yeah.
All the training they have is waiting for something that hopefully will never happen. And that's the way it is for all the crew members.
But they're prepared for it if it does. So flying cargo, where was your family stationed at that time?
We were in Tacoma, Washington.
Oh, nice. So you were doing that, and then did another 4 years go by, and then you got relocated?
It was about 3 years. I did that, and you can do the math, figure out how old I am. I did that during the Gulf War, early 90s. So I spent a couple of years hauling military stuff around the world, which included 24 hours off in Guam or the Philippines or Tokyo, and a lot of that was kind of interesting. Then my last year was the Gulf War, totally different.
Yeah.
Just, again, hauling military equipment to the Middle East to confront Saddam Hussein. That was very intense.
Wow.
So there was, was actual combat conditions, and we're not in a fighter, but we're in airspace where crazy things are happening. And chemical warfare planning and flying so hard where they waived crew rest requirements. So we just flew all the time. And the rest you got was often just on the airplane or just very, very demanding. So something I'm very proud of.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you again. Would you do most during that time, when you fly through a high stress zone? I'm sure there's other words for it, but do you do mostly airdrops instead of land and then come back out?
No, we mostly landed. The airdrop thing is expensive, and there's a lot of coordination. There's a lot going on there, and there's added risk to it. So we went to typically a whole bunch of different bases in just around the Middle East, particularly in Saudi Arabia, for months preparing for the attack against Saddam Hussein's forces, and then just resupplying, bringing in food, mail, bullets, whatever you needed.
Wow. And how long did you do that?
Well, I did that assignment for a little over 3 years, and then the last year was very consumed by the Gulf War. That summer after that, the Gulf War the war ended in February. Then that summer, I already had an assignment, and honestly, I thought they were going to take it away from me, but they didn't because the war did end fairly quickly. And then I went to graduate school. I remember very distinctly sitting with my wonderful boss who said, "Hey, Hargrove, you're doing pretty good in your career. I need to get you a job to the Pentagon or headquarters, something where you'll be politically connected." It was time to leave the cockpit, at least in that day and age. It was, you go fly for 6 or 8 or 10 years, and then you go do a desk job. I said, I would much rather go to the Air Force Academy and teach. And he said, you can do that. That's not a brilliant career move, but I get it and I'll support it. So that's what I did. The Air Force Academy interviewed me, hired me. I didn't have a master's degree at the time. So back to Montana, the Air Force Academy wants people on the faculty who have real operational experience. So they hired me, but I needed a master's degree to be able to teach engineering in the classroom. So they said, where do you want to go? And I said, Montana State's a really good engineering school. And my boss said, it is a very good engineering school. It's fairly inexpensive, done. So I had said Stanford, and they said, great school, too expensive, you're not going there. So I moved to Bozeman. You taxpayers paid for me to get my paycheck.
Happily.
Yes.
And go to class for 18 months and get my master's degree in mechanical engineering.
Was it nice to be back?
It was. And by then my dad had retired, so they were living across town. My wife, who was from Southern California, became a Montanan during that time. And she said, this is our future home. We loved it. And we were starting to raise our young kids there at the time. So that was a great fit in kind of the middle of my career.
I'm sure there's a lot of listeners that will be thrilled to know that you're a Bobcat.
Oh, yeah. No, deeply. I got all kinds of things. If you want me to say disparaging things about the Grizzly, let me go.
So then you moved again after that. And so your kids, did they like the moving like you did?
I think so.
Yeah.
By the time I was done and moved to Billings, my youngest, I have 4 kids. At that point, my youngest was only 4. So she only knows Billings is her home.
Yeah.
My oldest was a sophomore in high school, so she has more of that influence. She lived in 5 different locations or something.
And then, so did you end up going, so you went back to the Air Force to teach academy.
How long were you teaching at the Air Force?
About 3 years.
And was that back in Arizona?
No, that was back in Colorado Springs.
Oh, okay.
So I was a professor in the classroom for the cadets like I had once been. So I taught, my degree is mechanical engineering. I taught that and aeronautical engineering and physics.
Wow.
My undergraduate degree had been physics. So that all fit together really well. I flew a little bit on the side. They said, hey, you're a real pilot. We need you to contribute as a pilot, which was great. So I went and flew that same Cessna that I had flown before. There's more details that aren't worth going into. But anyway, I was a part-time flight instructor just teaching a brand new student who had 0 flight hours. But my primary job was just teaching engineering and physics in the classroom.
So what was it? I mean, what are some of those things? You mentioned that teaching a student that has 0 flying experience. I remember when I went to Rocky, I was like next door to like all the new pilots that said they were coming in, they're freshmen. They're like, I'm going to be a pilot, which I think changed by the time they graduated. But what are some of those things that those like first time, never flown, never really had any experience with it that they learn?
Some is just figuring out if it's a good fit.
Yeah.
No different than the student who says, I'm going to be a doctor, and they go to college and they take biology 101.
They're like,
and then,
no.
Yeah, anatomy and physiology, and they're bad at it. Fine. Mm-hmm. That's just called, and we say the students somewhat often at Rocky, it's just changing your major. You had this vision for being a pilot, and it just isn't a good fit. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's aptitude. Sometimes it's just really not liking it. Something as intense as medicine or being a pilot, you better really like what it is you're doing.
Because you're going to really, it's like you can't switch it as easily. I mean, like I have a business degree, which is a little...
It's a little more universal, a little broader.
Yeah.
Now, if you're going to be a pilot, you're going to be a pilot.
Mm-hmm. And they need you. It's a skill set. Okay, so then what happened?
Well, after 3 years.
Because we know there's some other things that maybe happened that we want to chat about.
So I was at the Air Force Academy teaching. My wife would tell you very much to her disappointment, mine as well. It was a good thing. I was selected for a school, but it caused us to leave there earlier than we would have been. And that was really a highlight of my career is the teaching in the classroom and being around airplanes. And it kind of formed I didn't know it, but it was forming me at the time for this job at Rocky Mountain College, which is airplanes, teaching, mentoring, college. And, oh, by the way, get to be in Montana. That's all perfect. So
hit all your bucket list.
Yeah, it really did. So we moved to Alabama for 1 year. I went to it's called Intermediate Service School. It's a leadership development course, military history and leadership for a year.
Mm-hmm. What was that like?
Well,
what were some of those things that you learned in that school?
It was the bigger view of where the military fits, both in our society and then, of course, studying war and studying peace. I distinctly remember a book we read in a course we had. The book was called Every War Must End. Well, the goal of war, if you're in it, is to win it. But when it's over, you still have to deal with that. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of bad ways to win a war. Harken back to World War I think a lot of mistakes were made there. So thinking from a strategic level, political level, and much more than just tactics, say, blow up that bridge and you'll win the war. It's a lot more complicated than that. Mm-hmm. So we studied an awful lot of history, an awful lot of very practical leadership, and being developed for more senior levels of leadership inside the military.
And I imagine that, and maybe not, but like ethics
Absolutely.
Training would be a huge part of that too.
That was very much a huge part of it, yes.
Especially once you get into those higher levels that they're positioning you for.
Well said. It really was.
And then Alabama
was, one thing was great about that was all my friends from being a cadet, et cetera, were all at the same point in our career. So many of us gathered there for the same year.
Oh, wow.
So it was just this instant group of friends that I haven't seen you in 6 years, but we were dear friends long ago. So it was really a very fun year. And I don't want to live in Alabama. It's quite hot and sticky.
Yeah, I was like, I was living in Alabama.
Humid.
I've never been to the state.
No, you don't go there in the summer. However, it was delightful. And it was fun to go live someplace I would never otherwise live. A year was enough, but it was a very fun year of study and then being with the friends. While I was there, it was in time for, of course, I knew the year was going to end. I went to Andrews Air Force Base in Washington, D.C. That's a competitive process. They do an interview for that. So many other positions in the military, you asked to do it, and someone ranks you. Everything's competitive. But this one was a little bit unique in that they flew us out, went through a 3-day interview process.
Wow.
And I was selected for, anyway, it's at Andrews Air Force Base, flying politicians. So I had been a heavy aircraft pilot. I was at the right point in my career. I had a good flying record, and that was pretty neat. So,
and you must have interviewed pretty dang well.
I guess so. I guess so.
One of those top.
Any interview tips for our listeners?
Oh, I could go on for hours.
Any top 3 you have?
We may need to come back to that. I actually teach an interview course at Rocky. So
we should do a short on that.
Yeah, we should.
That would be really good.
Our seniors graduate, they all take a course from me, in fact, on resumes and interviews, and we do mock interviews with them.
Oh, that's
valuable
great.
skill. So you flew, so you got the job, and then you moved to the D.C. area.
To the Washington, D.C. area. It's just a suburb outside of the Beltway, Andrews Air Force Base.
Yeah.
So the squadron I went into, we flew Boeing 757s, which is a mid-size, pretty good size airliner. Many of you have been on them before. They're very common. And our primary passengers were the vice president, the president's family, and the president's cabinet. So when the vice president's on the airplane, the call sign is Air Force 2. Obviously, Air Force 1's for the president, or the president's family or the cabinet. So today, it's been a long time, but tomorrow we're going to read in the news that Secretary of State Blinken is in the Middle East again, trying to negotiate peace. Well, how did he get there? Well,
Air Force 2?
He was on that airplane. We had 4 of them. And so when he's on it, it's not called Air Force 2. That's reserved for the vice president. But anyways, the president's cabinet, the president's family, and the vice president.
So what are some of those things? Because I know flying them is a security risk, or a little bit like when you're flying the president up in the air to get him from point A to point B. What's different about that whole process with those planes when you put like the VP, president, like the security level? How, like, are you checking the planes like nuts and bolts a lot more?
All of the people part of it is extremely different than an airliner. The airplane is an airliner. In fact, we did our training at United Airlines because they flew 757s and it's the same airframe. Being a pilot is the same. The cockpit is the same. The way you fly is the same. The security and on, weapons on the airplane. I mean, everybody's armed. You don't even think anything of it. That's just one small example. But our main job was to take politicians overseas. Probably 90% of our flying was outside of the country.
Wow.
So taking Secretary of State to Tel Aviv and then go to Jordan and then go to, hop around the Middle East, whatever's happening today. The security, the coordinating with the local embassy, all of that it wasn't about flying the airplane. It was about security and just taking care of your passenger. And of course, punctuality. And something we took very seriously is you land in some country and we've got some high-ranking politician on board our airplane, and we represented the United States of America. It wasn't so much about representing the Air Force. We did. But they see this blue and white shiny airplane with the big American flag on the tail, and then in big letters down the side of the airplane, it says United States of America, and here's the Secretary of Defense or whoever.
Wow.
So that portrayal of this is America. So from a pilot standpoint, just flying well, being on time, oh my goodness, that was a big deal. My personal goal was to be plus or minus 10 seconds when we arrived. Obviously, you can't always control that weather, air traffic control, but air traffic controllers were usually pretty good to us. And if we needed to speed up or slow down or cut a corner, we could usually do that. But when you pull into parking and come to a stop and there's a red carpet there and then there's a bunch of people with sabers or guns and there's the president of a country is there to meet you, the way you look and the way the punctuality and the perfection was really kind of fun. And that goes into the food on board the airplane and how smooth the landing is and all of that.
And very detail oriented. And I'm sure, I mean, from how you're describing it, it sounds like a very prideful moment for the pilots because you guys are getting them to and from everywhere. You are representing the United States of America and just all of those things that you described that come with transporting.
It is about
a high-level official.
Well, it's about being excellent. Though I will add, this is what I love about aviation. People in aviation at all levels. Certainly, think of the mechanic. You don't just do an okay job. You follow the rules. You make it perfect. You get inspected. You ask someone for help. You be sure that it is correct, obviously. And that just pervades aviation. So in some respects, what we did wasn't that much different. But when you're around, you have the vice president on board, it is interesting to see what he has to eat or take care of his dogs or his exercise equipment or just making sure the flight attendants have everything they need or calling ahead when you're going to land someplace for fuel to make sure that they bring Diet Coke out to the airplane, a particular bottle of wine or whatever. All those little customer service, and again, lots of people do that in a lot of industries, but that was very different for me. Flying a dirty cargo airplane, you just wanted to get there. Now the people really made a difference. It was fun.
And were you guys the one calling for the special Diet Coke bottle?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
yeah.
it was you guys that knew.
Oh yeah.
So who told you? How did that?
Did you get a
work?
FAQ sheet?
They like this kind of wine.
We did. We kept track. So if you have I'm going to date myself, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. I flew her many times. I had great respect for her. And one thing, I'll say something, this isn't political, maybe it's apolitical, and that is I flew 4 years way back in the day under the Clinton-Gore administration. And then one day I went to work and there's a guy named George Bush in office with Vice President Cheney. So a complete change. So whoever's listening to this, if you're old enough, you actually liked one of those and you probably didn't like the other one. I'm here to tell you, even if you don't like their politics, they are all hardworking. They are all called to what they do. They believe in what they're doing. You may disagree with what they're doing, but their heart is in the right place. So they worked very hard at that. Now I lost my train of thought from what you were just asking me about that.
But it sounds like they were called to serve.
They're called to serve, and
absolutely.
You have a secret list of the likes and dislikes.
So I'm going to go back to Madeleine Albright, is why I said it. She was not old, but she certainly was not a young woman at the time. Very demanding. She was not goofing off, and none of them do. They're traveling very hard. They have business to accomplish. They're not being tourists. They're not going to shows or anything like that. She really had very specific demands about food. So we would send her to her hotel. We called it the picnic basket, and it was just super boring. She wanted tuna, and she wanted a particular brand of mayonnaise, and she wanted some fruit, and she wanted a certain type of crackers because she's going to these lavish meals in sometimes odd countries. She one time came into the cockpit and was just shooting the breeze as we were flying across the ocean. She said that is so hard because they put this lavish feast. She says it's not like the food's good because it's their specialties, not ours. So she would be polite, but she really wanted to just have some tuna on a cracker and a banana.
Something healthy a little bit.
But we really paid attention to that. So my joke I was just making is, you knew before you flew, and we had flight attendants that chased most of this, but hey, if that person likes Diet Coke and not Diet Pepsi, well, it's our job to know that and make sure that whatever it is they need to be as comfortable as they can, because when they land, I get to go to bed. And as soon as we land, the president of a country or king or somebody meets them, and off they go to negotiate the future of the world. Boy, they need to be well rested, well prepared, and they need tuna and crackers in their stomach. That's what we need to do.
That's so thoughtful. And so where would you guys go? Would you guys stay on that base, or would you go stay at a hotel?
We almost never were at military bases because it was politicians. Yeah. So you'd go to Tel Aviv and you just stay in some hotel in Tel Aviv. So it was mostly world capitals.
Yep.
I've been everywhere.
Wow.
Those trips were a little more interesting in that you didn't lose your airplane. When you're flying cargo, you could land and then somebody else 2 hours later would take your airplane and you'd go to bed, and 15 hours later you get a new airplane. Here, if you had the Secretary of Defense and we're touring Europe, we'd land in Rome and we might stay for 30 hours. Well, hey, for 30 hours, I do need to sleep and I do need a flight plan, but I had time to go be a tourist. And then the next day's in London, and the next day's in Moscow, and the next day's in wherever.
Wow.
So that part of it was interesting. And we were usually downtown, usually near an embassy, and usually in a capital city.
Yeah, and usually I feel like the embassies, they're like close to tourist type historic monuments.
Yes.
Like in Rome, there's some ones that are really close.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. All that's true.
Wow.
So here you are flying politicians all over the world. That seems like a very stressful job at times, because you are also backup for the president. So what are some tips of handling that level of stress?
It's all about the people that you surround yourself with. And of course, those were selected for us. The weakest link doing that type of job is not weak at all. Everybody is really good at their job. And then it's just the obvious, and it's no different in your job. It's just being prepared. You come to work not knowing what's going to happen that day. And I think it's something people love about aviation. When everything goes according to plan, it's not that hard. But you're there for the unusual. And in our case, that could, in someone flying charter today, your passenger who owns the airplane can say, we were going there, but instead let's go over here. Well, you've got a lot to do in a very short amount of time, and it has to be done right, safely, that sort of thing. So that flexibility was a big part of it. But it's just being prepared and knowing your stuff and study. And in that case, flying overseas, I really enjoyed flying overseas. The rules are a little bit different, but then every country is unique. And that being prepared and learning from the person that went ahead of you, and we're landing in Nairobi, Kenya, someplace kind of off the beaten path. Well, what is security like? Can you drink the water? What's the parking going to be like? What's the traffic going to be like getting back to the airport? Just 1,000 little details that required study. You're ready.
That's just, wow. When you were flying all of them, how many years did you do that? And then were there some were certain people, you talk about someone coming to talk to you guys in the cockpit, were you guys on a good level of speaking with a lot of them? Where they knew you guys and they're like, oh, hey, Dan, how's it going? How's your wife and kids? Or was it more of security detail? They're getting on the plane to maybe take a nap and then get off and go work.
The passenger, the person, Madeleine Albright or Dick Cheney or Colin Powell, dating myself, we had very little interaction. It was important to remember our role. We drive the bus. It's an important bus. It's a valuable bus, but it's still a bus. So the limousine or the helicopter would land in front of our airplane. Limousine pulls up. You couldn't even see it, kind of back in front of the wing. And then someone on the headset would say, he's on board. Okay, let's start the engines. And 4 days later, I still haven't laid eyes on him because he just came and went, and he was in game mode, whoever he or she was in game mode when they got off the airplane. Often they would come up into the cockpit. That was really fun. The last leg home, you're coming back from Japan, let's say, carrying whoever it is. And they're bored and their body clock is a mess. And so they just go for a walk in the airplane. And Colin Powell, who was kind of a real hero of mine, came up into the cockpit, and he's just bored. So he sits there, and he's Secretary of State, and I want him to ask me about his opinion, about my opinions about his policy.
Yeah.
No, he doesn't do that. But he does want to make small talk about the military or about the flight or about this airplane. And again, they're just human beings. Mm-hmm. Are we friends with them? Oh, no, absolutely not. It was a pool of crew members flying a pool of airplanes for a pool of customers. So it wasn't like the Secretary of Defense had the same crew every time. It changed all the time. I was a commander, so I was the squadron commander over this organization. So I spent, I think you started to ask me, I was there 7 years, various reasons for that. I should have been there 3 or 4, but then I was named commander, so I was the boss over about 130 people.
All of those people that service the Air Force 2.
The Air Force 2 squadron, yes.
Wow.
So it was all of the pilots and the radio operators and the flight attendants, et cetera, and the airplanes. So most of my attention was at a desk, worrying about people's careers, who to hire, who to promote, what's best for their careers, but also getting the calls from the White House or the State Department or the Pentagon for the Secretary of Defense or whoever with often their complaints or their problems. Hey, this airplane's out on a trip and the Secretary of the Treasury is on board and we need the crew to do this or whatever it might be. But back to that leadership, that was a real highlight of my whole career, was being a commander with real serious legal responsibility. And yes, caring for the passengers was important, but I've got good people that do that. The aircraft commander and the radio operator and the flight attendant, they know how to care for the passengers. My job's to care for them and their families and their careers and their promotions, that sort of thing.
And did you work with the Air Force One commander, or were you guys kind of separate? We
were separate. There were several flying organizations at that base, depending on types of airplanes, because we also had some Gulfstream aircraft, which are smaller. They hold about a dozen people or so. The Air Force One organization was kind of literally across the street. The people in it came from these other squadrons. So once a year, I knew the presidential pilot. There's a person who has the title of presidential pilot, and he's the commander over all the people that take care of Air Force One. And so every couple of times a year, he'd call me up and go, "Hey, Dan, this is Mark." Oh, no, here it comes. Well, he only wants the best, of course. So he'd say, "Hey, you're chief of standardization." He was very nice, but he wasn't asking me. He was telling me,
I'm plucking someone from you.
I'm plucking him, and he's going to come be, or a flight attendant or a mechanic or whoever it was. They'd go over to the Air Force One organization, and that was definitely a promotion. And of course, you want to support that.
But a testament to your leadership with those individuals, because you're just like you talked earlier, like you're helping them on their career trajectory and helping them grow into Air Force One, calling them and wanting them. So what were some things that you learned during that time of overseeing that team as the commander?
We put you on the spot.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of repeat myself. The command, it's the awesome responsibility of caring for people. And much like a parent or a coach, where you pour yourself into your people and you have to discipline and you have to set them straight, but you need to give them the resources to get the job done. Not everybody's the same, and you separate them out based on ability, based on potential, knowing what is appropriate level of discipline when somebody messes up. And then again, this was a very strong group of people. It wasn't like they were out getting a bunch of DUIs. They weren't. But how to promote their careers, and like my boss had done for me, saying, what do you want next? How can I help you with the next step? Oh, you're going to leave the military at the end of this term. How can I help you with that? What advice can I give you? How can I set you up for success in the next phase of your life? And then the getting along with the other people, whether it was our passengers, which included the White House, or just the other organizations on the Air Force Base, and how we interacted with them for airfield security, whatever. Just that interaction with other people was a big deal.
So you mentioned transitioning service members. What did your transition out of the service look like?
I did that for 7 years. towards the end of that, I was going to retire in the summer. I hate the math everybody's doing right now.
I'm really bad at math, so I'm not doing it.
Well, the summer of 2002 was my 20 years, and I could talk for hours, but it was time for a change. It had been wonderful. The things that were coming, the promotion I was probably going to get, and the types of jobs I would go to, I was really ready for more stability. Had 4 young kids. It was just time. So I made that decision. Then September 11th, attacks happened, and then they said, nope, nobody's getting out of the military. So they froze me for an extra year. So I didn't leave there till the summer of 2003, which was totally fine. I was still able to contribute. Because of that, and I really believe this is God's providence, my departure date from the Air Force changed by a whole year. The jobs I didn't go to don't matter. There were many I looked at and even had a couple of offers. But I was walking down the hallway in the squadron, and now I'm a lame duck. I'm leaving the Air Force in 3 months, and everybody knows it, and that's great. And a friend of mine who was also leaving, he ended up going to Southwest Airlines, being an airline pilot, very typical. He said, hey, Dan, have you heard about that opening? Because he's searching all the job sites I am. There's some school in Montana that needs a director of aviation. I knew Rocky Mountain College, but that's really all I knew.
Yeah.
And I said, I need to look into that. And he just said, it seems like that would fit you. Oh, boy. I go to the website to read the job description, Montana, aviation, education. This is me.
Checking all those
jobs
lists
for you. They're like, Dan would be perfect.
It was great. So I retired from the Air Force. I was out of the Air Force and then came to my interview at Rocky Mountain College. It wasn't like I retired so that I could come to Billings.
Yeah.
But it was in that order. But it really was God's direction. I retired. Next month, I flew out to Billings, said, this is a good fit. And then a month after that, I started work.
Oh, wow.
And that's been almost 21 years ago.
Wow. Well, I know Rocky's glad to have you as a fellow alumni to say that. What's it been like to be at Rocky and in Montana with your family, with the career? Because it kind of sounds like with all of the learning that you've done and the things you got to do in your career, this was really like the perfect job for you. Like you said, it brought in the mentorship, the training, the aviation, the flying.
Well, you just said it. It's been great. I just am very thankful to have all of those things in a second career. The doing 21, where I stand today, I did 21 years active duty in the Air Force, followed by 21 years at Rocky Mountain College. They're different. They're similar. It's been great to have 2 very distinct careers. Rocky's a great place. I go home tired. I have big days. There's a lot to deal with, but it's good. And again, like just being a young flight instructor, pouring into a student, mentoring them in their careers, helping them, of course, with classwork, but with the bigger picture of who they are as a person, helping them to integrate athletics or an internship, and having some power to be able to do that. I know everybody and I know the system, and I can help the student get to where the student wants to go. I think a big part of my job is to help create them as professionals, but help them figure out where they want to go. You don't have to follow my dream, but what is your realistic dream? Are you in the right major? And if you are, let's get you to the career track you want to be on.
Wow.
I love that.
And I think just hearing that is really cool. And so can you talk to us a little bit for those that maybe didn't know Rocky had an aviation program, what that program entails? Because you guys have your own hangar, you have a fleet up at the airport?
Well, we do. Rocky is an excellent 4-year college based in the liberal arts all the way back to 1878. That tradition informs the basis of the aviation program. I say to prospective students all the time, the best thing about our aviation program, it's not the airplanes. Those are great and they're fun and they're cool. But the best thing is the college that it's in, the basis in the liberal arts, the ability to be on the speech and debate team or sing in the choir or participate in the art show. And the list goes on. And the core classes that you'll have an opportunity to explore and to take. So that's the best part of it. So what was your, go
No,
back to
yeah,
what you're
I just
asking?
think just a little bit like how many, just those little details, like how many students do you usually have? How many airplanes do you fly?
We are the largest this year. I don't think it will last because we really are full. We have a waiting list right now for fall flyers. Doesn't mean you shouldn't look into it if you're listening to this. But we are the largest academic program on campus. This past fall, we had 148 students.
Wow.
In a small school that has just under 1,000 total enrollment.
That's like a lot of Rocky's population.
It is, and it's kind of neat because our students, they're a big fish in a small pond. So Rocky, everybody knows each other. There's this great sense of family and accountability. But when our student is in the art show or in student government, everybody kind of understands the world that they're in because they know other aviation students. So a way to go into professional aviation is go to a four-year college like Rocky Mountain College, get a four-year bachelor's degree. It's called aeronautical science. Part of the curriculum is learning how to fly. Our typical student is 18, right out of high school, saw the movie Top Gun too many times, and flew with his uncle once. And that's their background, and they just think it kind of sounds cool. Okay, that's our job now to mold you into the serious aviation professional. While they're at Rocky, every other day, 3 days a week, they go up to the airport. We have our own hangar. We have 10 airplanes there. They're mostly a Piper fleet, and they fly. So they fly on a Monday and a Wednesday and a Friday morning for an hour and a half, get in their car, go to their English class, go to their athletic practice, go be a regular college student. After 4 years of taking professional aviation courses like aviation law and aviation safety and human factors in a cockpit, and the list goes on, just like any major. They've learned to fly. They have 4, I'll call them licenses from the FAA, private pilot, instrument, commercial pilot, and multi-engine. That's really the minimum to enter the career field. Most of them go on to become a certified flight instructor so they can teach. That's who our flight instructors are. They tend to be seniors and brand new graduates teaching our younger students to fly. They get the experience they need. Something I'm really proud of is they do go to the airlines. The airlines are great. They pay super well. Mom and dad get free travel. Yeah. And we have really good relationships with flow-through programs for multiple airlines. But a good number of them want to do other things. We do put about 1 a year into the military, all various branches. We'll send a couple up to Alaska to fly backcountry Alaska.
Wow.
1 or 2 will go be firefighting pilots eventually. That's a little longer path. Or fly for a corporation or a small company or net jets, or fly for air ambulance for a hospital. There's so many options in aviation. I say it all the time. You can't have it all. If you want to be home every night and you want to fly to Paris, something's got to give. But there are various career paths, but they all require the same thing: a well-educated, well-rounded, thinking student, graduate who knows how to lead. And yes, they do need to know how to fly an airplane, but it's that other stuff that matters the most and that sets them up for very successful careers.
That sounds like great. I learned a lot of new things. And there's aviation management too, isn't there?
We do. So that's our main major called aeronautical science. Our other major, and it's not uncommon that a student says, I don't think I like flying all that much, but I like aviation, because they have very little exposure to the industry. They become an aviation management major, more business classes, manage an airport, manage an airline, go into the world of drones. We have a whole drone program.
Wow.
That's an exploding career field. It's not how to fly the drone, it's how to lead and manage and safety and regulations, that sort of thing. So yes, that's our other major.
Yeah, because I thought there were a couple, but I just think of like those pathways you described, and I can think of like in the class I was in and in the time that I was at Rocky, one that flew for Billings Clinic, one that they're now flying for, Delta United, some of those bigger ones. Some flew for Alpine Air for a little bit. So the different options that they do really have graduating out.
Yeah, that's very true, and that's very much who we are.
I have a very important question to ask you.
Yes.
People who get motion sick, any tips? Just don't fly.
Don't eat a burrito. Do eat a banana. There's potassium that helps.
Okay.
If you're flying a small plane, it's rougher. Don't fly in the afternoon on a summer day when it's bumpier.
I've been on Cape Air. It was
go in the morning flight.
interesting.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. It's a small plane, so it's more susceptible to the bumps. Do the 8 a.m. flight, not the 4 p.m. flight.
So do you still fly a lot with with the students? I know that there's the senior instructors, the juniors, the ones that have graduated. Are you up there a lot with them flying?
I don't, to be honest.
Yeah.
I just, right before this meeting, I was just at flight operations, kind of in a nuts and bolts meeting that I have every Monday morning. I know the details of what's going on there. Honestly, my job is busy enough. If you're going to be a pilot, you better be a pilot.
Yeah.
And doing it right. So when I fly, honestly, I'm usually in the back seat, not trying to correct the details of flight, but more helping the instructor with teaching skills. Mm-hmm. So how the student does is not that big a deal to me. It's talking to the instructor afterwards and encouraging them as a teacher.
Yeah. And so with that said, which sounds great, do you fly a lot anymore?
Fly at the controls myself?
Yeah, just
I do
you.
not.
Yeah.
I don't.
I didn't know if you're like, I fly sometimes on the weekends.
I don't. Again, if you're going to do it, you better do it right. And it's not a cheap hobby to have.
No, I bet it's not.
No, I don't.
Well, Rocky's really lucky to have you, Dan.
Well, I'm very pleased to be there, and I'm really having a lot of fun being here with you.
Yeah, it's fun. So we like to ask 3 rapid fire questions at the end of each episode, but quickly we're going to hear a message from our sponsor.
Hi, this is Shannon Hahn with the Department of Transportation in the Small Business Program. I'm here to talk to you today about the DBE and the SBE programs. The DBE program is for disadvantaged small businesses, so that's minority and women, and the SBE program is for non-minority and non-women-owned businesses. These programs provide business assistance to contribute to the growth and self-sufficiency of businesses in the transportation industry. Services include business skills development, training, networking opportunities, bonding assistance, and much, much more. So if you're a highway-related business, please go to our website. You'll see what the eligibility criteria is at mdt.mt.gov. You can call our 1-800 number, which is 800-883-5811. So give us a call. Thanks.
Dan, before we get into the rapid fire questions, you talked a little bit about September 11th. 2001.
That's quite a day as a pilot. I was a commander, but I was asked to fly the backup airplane for President Bush on September 10th. He was going down to Florida to an education event. You need a separate security clearance to be with the president or the president's family, which I had. So it's the easiest flying in the world. Great. I get to get out from behind my desk. I'm going to fly to Florida. We have this cool call sign. This is not going to be much work, and it isn't. I was in the backup airplane. Everywhere the president goes, there are 2 airplanes. In the United States, the second airplane is empty, just waiting for the first airplane to break or if there was some sort of crisis. It never happens, so it's very easy flying. We went so I spent the night in Florida. The next morning, I was out at the airplane doing pre-flight, and the other pilot with me, his girlfriend called and said, "Have you heard the news?" Well, we had not. We were getting ready to fly and the attacks had just started. So we just listened to an AM radio broadcast, had no information that no one else had, just heard the craziness that was happening with the 4 airplanes going down over a period of a couple of hours. My story was the president came out then to fly, and I'll make this short. We followed him to Louisiana. Air Force One went out over the Gulf of Mexico just kind of to think. We were told in there that Air Force One was a target. That was not true, but at the time there was just so much confusion. We landed with the president. Again, my airplane was empty, but we're following them in Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana, completely out of the way. Certainly no terrorist would have expected that. We then took on board our airplanes a bunch of passengers off of Air Force One, mostly members of Congress and the Senate. And then we went back to Washington, D.C. A human side to the story was I walked into the base operations there, and the crazy morning, really, there were no airplanes airborne anywhere in the country except basically us and a few fighter aircraft. When I went into base operations, I had a minute to breathe, and I called home and talked to my wife. And it was a very emotional moment. And I felt what everybody in America did. Up till then, I was just some guy at work doing my job. And then I'm talking to my upset wife. My daughter is at school off the Air Force Base in Washington. Total chaos there. My daughter had been told that the Pentagon had been destroyed. Well, her classmates were all children of Pentagon employees. Again, that wasn't true, but it's just that.
But there wasn't
confusion.
social media.
Well, there wasn't any of that. It was just, in her case, it was just the rumor mill of a bunch of ninth graders talking to each other. Anyway, I came back out to the airplane. We flew to Washington, D.C., and the president went to Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, which is World War III Cold War headquarters. And I think to President Bush's great credit, he won finally the fight with his staff to say, I am the president. I need to be home. I need to address the nation from the White House. And I really respect the way he did that. We flew to Washington, D.C., and we didn't have TV. So I had my first visual for the day, and that was seeing the column of smoke as I was getting ready to land coming up from the Pentagon. Had the attacks happened just a few hours later, I would have been home and I would have been at a meeting. I had a meeting that day of the month at the Pentagon. So the Pentagon doesn't get as much attention, and maybe rightly so because many less deaths, but a very serious moment and a reminder that people died because of the uniform they wore. People died in the World Trade Centers because they were Americans in business, that there are bad people that want to hurt Americans because of who we are and what we stand for. And it's easy to lose sight of that sometimes, I think. And that day was a tremendous reminder of that you could be some person solving a budget problem in the World Trade Center or in the Pentagon, just doing your business, and then boom, you're dead because bad people don't want you doing that and don't like what America represents.
Wow.
So anyway, there's a very short version of my day.
No, and I think that you were really involved then. I mean, like direct impact. You're with the president in Florida as all of this is happening. They're flying up to make their decision of, do we go back? Do we bunker down? What do we do? And you guys are there to transport.
Yes, and we were just following orders from Air Force One, quite frankly. And of course, he's devising the best plan. And there's a phrase called the fog of war. You just don't know. There's no playbook for how to do these things.
So it had never happened to us.
Right, and nothing even close. So the decision-making process is tough.
Wow.
But I really think President Bush's decisions that day were very strong.
And then you to be gone, which kind of helped, coincidentally, not being back in D.C. yet. So
yeah, that's true. That's true.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that story with us.
Thank you.
That's
so
really
much.
great. So we'll just jump into our rapid fire really quick.
Yeah.
They're not as great, but let's start off with what's some of the best advice you've ever received?
It's all about integrity. You know, when you look in the mirror, you know what the right thing to do is, whether that is informed by your family, informed by faith, which it is for me, informed by some touchstone that you have in your life. I often pick on grandparents here. Grandparents are awesome sources of wisdom because they've lived life. And I think most everybody says, when my grandma talks, I'm smart enough to listen. And we may ignore our parents. That's just the way it is. But that touchstone, that having something to fall back on where you know that you know that you know the right thing to do. And if it costs you, so be it. It costs you. It probably won't. The system is usually pretty rewarding to people that are honest. But if you do the right thing and it hurts you, you'll get over it really, really fast. But you do the wrong thing, you know, the only thing, they can take an awful lot of things away from you. They can take your life away from you, but no one can take your integrity. Your integrity has to be given up willingly. And if you don't give it up, it's a sweet life.
I really like that.
I love that.
I do think grandparents and parents, I'll credit my parents too.
Parents get wiser when the kid gets older.
Yeah, I would agree.
My question for you is, what is your favorite aircraft to fly?
Oh, if I could go fly one for just an afternoon, it would be the T-38 that I had flown before, just because it's fast and high performance.
That's that fast one.
That's a fast one. I was a trainer.
That's the flash
that you can
one.
Yes. You can go upside down and you can roll 2 times in 1 second, et cetera, et cetera.
How does that compare to Blue Angels aircrafts?
Similar. It's smaller. They can do similar things. That is the Blue Angels aircraft. It's an F-18, and it's an actual fighter used actually in combat. So it's more just more capable. However, back in the 1970s and early 1980s, the Air Force Thunderbirds, which is the equivalent of the Blue Angels, they actually flew the T-38 with red, white, and blue paint on them. So 7G is upside down in formation, kind of fun stuff.
That's really cool. So, okay, what are some non-negotiables for you in business and in life?
You don't want to hear an integrity speech again, do you?
We like integrity.
Well, that's an important one. There's that sense of satisfaction that we've all had in a job well done, and knowing that you have been excellent for the sake of excellence. And it's nice when the boss notices. It's nice when you get a raise. It's nice when you're promoted. It's nice when you win the contest, whatever the contest was. But that feeling you have when you do a job well done, and maybe the people around you don't even know it. Someone who's really close to you, who understands the details, they may appreciate you. But the customer or someone else may have no idea that you knocked yourself out and you really pulled off some heroic work. That is worth fighting for. That is worth expending your energy. Excellence is its own reward. So when you go to bed and you look in the mirror and you say, my boss didn't appreciate me, the customer actually berated me today, but I did a good job. I did the best job I was capable of. That's a wonderful feeling.
That is a good feeling, especially thank you, Dan. This has been fabulous to have you on. So really, thank you for joining us on The Vault.
My pleasure. It's been very fun.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Like you said in the beginning, you've lived a great life. So.
Well, I don't know about that. I'm thankful. It's good.
And we're excited to share a little bit with our audience. So thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed this episode.
Make sure you are subscribed to The Vault at 201 North Broadway, wherever you podcast, including YouTube.
Connect with us on Facebook at The Vault at 201 North Broadway and Instagram at TheVault_201.
Don't forget to visit us at thevault@201.com and subscribe to our newsletter.
We will see you next time.
Bye. I gotta ask, did you have a call sign? Or is that just a Top Gun Maverick thing?
It really is a fighter pilot thing.
Oh, okay.
I jokingly gave myself a call sign of Flash just
I love it.
because it's a long story. No, I don't. I don't.
Thank you to Big Sky Economic Development for supporting The Vault at 201 North Broadway. Big Sky Economic Development provides leadership and resources for business creation, expansion, retention, new business recruitment, community development, and workforce development. Learn more at bigsky economicdevelopment.org.